Episode 4 What Lies Beneath the Hill. It's a warm summer's day, and you decide to take a walk in the fragrant air of the woods which fringe a rural village in the heart of Scotland. Having passed the ancient stone church, with its neat walled graveyard, you make your way carefully along the track to the hill. You've heard the local rumours, of course, some whispered, some shared with glee, telling of the wee folk, the fae, the gid folk, or as they're more commonly known, the fairies. But these are not the fleeting, dainty fairies of Disney movies and cute Victorian illustrations. There are no wings or caps made from buttercups or acorns. In fact, the locals are cautious about the fair folk, saying they are not to be trusted, that they are often tricksters who can abduct humans, especially infants, even when they're supposedly safe in their homes. It's better to show them respect than risk their tricks. But you've also heard the fairy folk can grant wishes. So you're not surprised when you arrive at your destination, a clearing in the woods at the top of an ancient hill, and discover the many small gifts and trinkets left for these elusive creatures. Tattered ribbons and small soft toys tied to the branches of one particular tree have been bleached by the sun and washed by the rain. They flutter visibly in the warm breeze, as if blown by unseen mouths. You step cautiously towards the tree, and crouching down you leave your own offering. It consists of nothing more than a small silver charm from some long-lost necklace and a couple of coins. You place the items on one gnarled root of the old tree, and then lean towards the rough bark of the trunk, and whisper your request. Standing up, you glance around, hoping that nobody's around to see your actions, but thankfully, the woods are empty. Of course, that doesn't explain why, when you walk out of the woods, you experience the unsettling feeling that you are being watched by many small eyes. I'm Norman Brown, and you're listening to the Scary Scotland podcast, where we delve into the darker corners of Scottish legends to find connections with the wider world and culture. Tonight, in episode 4, What Lies Beneath the Hill, we travel to the picturesque woods of the Trossachs, where for hundreds, and perhaps thousands of years, the Sidhe, or fair folk, are said to reside, and we explore where these stories came from and why they still endure. So make yourself comfortable, and come with me as we visit the Fairy Hill of Aberfoyle to see what might lie there. Located just outside the town of Aberfoyle in central Scotland, Fairy Hill, also known as Doon Hill, exists in an area of historical and cultural significance. Like many places throughout the country, the hill is steeped in local legends and folklore, playing a key role in the tales surrounding the notorious Scottish outlaw Rob Roy MacGregor. Additionally, the area also holds strong connections to the Reverend Kirk, a notable figure in Scottish religious history, and is also famous for its association with fairies and other supernatural entities. Tonight, we will explore the geographical area of Doon Hill, its connection to Rob Roy, to the Reverend Kirk, and to the rich legends of fairies surrounding this site. Doon Hill is next to Aberfoyle, a picturesque village in the central part of the country. The hill itself rises steeply above the surrounding landscape, providing a panoramic view of the nearby Loch Ard and the lush green forests that cover much of the area. The landscape here is rugged, with dense woodland, rocky outcrops and natural springs. The hill is part of the larger Trossachs National Park, an area which has been visited since Victorian times because of its picturesque scenery and historical importance. However, the location of the hill and its proximity of Doon Hill to Loch Ard and the surrounding forests adds to its mystique. In ancient Scottish traditions, any body of water, from a spring to a loch, was seen as connecting this world to the other one. You just need to think about Scottish legends linked to water, such as kelpies, fairy pools, selkies and water horses, such as the shy one residing in Loch Ness, to get a sense of this. and in a similar sense, Doonhill is often seen as a liminal space where the natural world and the supernatural collide. It is this connection to the unknown and the otherworldly that has made Doonhill such a focal point for mythology. One of the most notable historical figures associated with the area is Rob Roy MacGregor. He was an 18th century folk hero, often described as a Scottish Robin Hood. MacGregor was a skilled Highland warrior. He was involved in numerous conflicts during his life, including battles with both the English crown and rival clans. MacGregor's story is interwoven with many sites in the Scottish Highlands, and Doonhill is one such location tied to his legend. Much as Robert the Bruce is connected to a certain cave in Dumfries and Galloway, so too is Rob Roy's legend connected to Doonhill. According to some versions of the folklore, Doonhill was a place where Rob Roy and his clan would seek refuge from their enemies. The hill's isolated position amongst the dense woodland made it an ideal hiding place for the outlaw and his followers. Its lofty position as well gave them the ideal view to spy on their enemies or see approaching forces. However, some stories suggest that Rob Roy had a special connection to the supernatural, and the fairies believed to inhabit Doonhill may have played a role in protecting him during his various escapades. Whether as a literal refuge or a symbolic site where the natural and supernatural worlds intersect, Doonhill holds a special place in the broader narrative of Rob Roy's life and legend, and perhaps this particular fusion of history and myth might have been enough to convey the idea of Doonhill as a supernatural place down through the many centuries. But Rob Roy was not the only historical figure to encounter something metaphysical in this beautiful place. The Reverend Robert Kirk, who was born in 1644, was a Scottish minister, scholar, and folklorist who is perhaps best known for his writings on the supernatural. His most famous work was The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, published in 1691. This book explores the idea that fairies and other supernatural beings were a real, albeit invisible, part of the natural world. Reverend Kirk is closely associated with Doonhill, as he is believed to have conducted some of his spiritual practices in the area. In particular, Kirk had an intense fascination with fairies, and his research on the topic likely took place near and upon this very hill. Yet the minister's interest was more than an academic exercise. He is said to have been deeply invested in the local legends surrounding Doonhill, which he believed was a place of sacred mystery and magic. His writings reflect his sincere conviction that fairies inhabited specific places like Doonhill, and that these creatures were integral to understanding the spiritual world too. Kirk's work on fairy folklore, which is universally recognised as preserving the traditions and beliefs of the Scots, also added a degree of credibility to the idea that fairies were not simply fantasy, but instead were part of an ancient and profound cultural tradition. However, in addition to the academic importance of Kirk's writing in preserving beliefs, his connection to the hill is also thought to be personal. Some sources suggest that he believed that the fairies could communicate with him directly, and he may even have gone so far as to conduct rituals in the area. It's even claimed that Kirk's relentless engagement with the supernatural led to his mysterious death in 1692, which some locals believe was a direct result of his interaction with the fairies. His untimely passing only enhanced the myth of Doonhill further, as a place where the boundaries between the natural world and the supernatural were blurred. A prominent feature of Doonhill is the so-called Minister's Tree, which stands as a testament to Reverend Kirk's connection to the place. This tree is located near the summit of the hill, and according to legend, it was the exact site where Kirk would sit and meditate upon matters of the spirit. Some versions of his story claim that the minister's deep communion with nature and the supernatural was centred around this tree, and that he believed and professed that it had magical properties. The metaphysical connection to the minister's tree also ties into the broader spiritual and mystical narrative that surrounds Doonhill and much of Scotland. In many cultures, including that of the ancient Druids, whose belief had been widespread in Scotland from 4000 BC to the 7th century, specific trees were considered sacred and believed to serve as a bridge between the earthly and spiritual realms. We can even see this idea as part of a wider belief reflected in the mythology of the Tree of Life, bridging the earthly and spiritual worlds, and the Tree of Enlightenment, which also guided the Buddha Siddhartha Gautama on how to escape suffering and access the higher planes of existence. And we even see the notion echoed in fiction down through the centuries. I remember how when my children were young, I would read to them Enid Blyton's Tales of the Faraway Tree, in which a large oak would serve as the magical home to pixies, fairies, and other beings, but it would also serve as an ever-changing portal to magical worlds. In the world-renowned Lord of the Rings novel, trees are sentient and wise, playing a pivotal role in the fight against dark forces, and we see magical trees in the Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter, and more recently Game of Thrones. In Kirk's case, the tree at the heart of his legend may have symbolised the minister's connection to the fairies and the other world. Although the exact species of the tree is not known, its place in the local folklore remains significant, and even today in the 21st century, it continues to draw attention from visitors who are curious about its historical and supernatural associations, particularly with the fairy kind. The fairies of Scottish folklore, particularly those associated with places like Doon Hill, differ significantly from the dainty fairies depicted in popular fiction, such as in Disney movies or in modern fantasies. In traditional Scottish belief, fairies were not the cute, playful creatures that are often seen in the media, but rather enigmatic and potentially dangerous. For centuries, Scottish fairies were viewed as part of the natural world, residing in specific locations such as hills, forests, springs, and lochs. They were often believed to be the spirits of the earth or ancestors, and they could be both helpful and malevolent. Fairies within the Scottish tradition could bring good fortune, fertility, and protection, but they were also feared for their ability to cause harm or mischief, such as stealing children or causing illness. Their behaviour was often unpredictable, and they were seen as entities with their own agendas, quite indifferent to human concerns, and so becoming involved with the fairies was always a gamble. In contrast, modern depictions of fairies often cast them as friendly and whimsical creatures, more aligned with human values and interests. These modern fictional fairies might have magical powers, but they're usually depicted as benevolent and playful, as opposed to the more complex and mysterious fairies of traditional folklore. The fairies of Doon Hill, like those in other parts of Scotland, were not to be trifled with, and the belief in them was tied to respect for unseen forces of nature. So what indications might a wanderer in the woods find to suggest that they had unwillingly stumbled into fairy territory? Well, one sign it would be easy to spot is a fairy ring, or fairy circle. This is a natural phenomenon that has been long associated with fairies. These rings are typically formed by a circle of mushrooms or other fungi that appear in a field or woodland. In traditional belief, fairy rings were thought to be portals to the realm of the fairy, or the site of fairy gatherings. The mushrooms within the circle were believed to be a sign that the fairies had danced there, and stepping into the ring was thought to bring misfortune or to make one more susceptible to fairy enchantment. Some people even claimed that if you stepped into a fairy ring, you would simply vanish, as if they served as a direct portal into the other world. They are almost like the ancient version of crop circles, providing a clear marker to the rest of us of something otherworldly. One of my favourite depictions of a fairy ring in fiction can be found in the novel and subsequent film Coraline by Neil Gaiman. In the first few pages of that dark fantasy adventure, we see the young female protagonist step on a fairy ring of squidgy brown toadstools, after which she discovers herself dipping in and out of an initially alluring other world, which is inhabited by people who look like her family, but are actually supernatural beings who want to trap Coraline there forever. It reminds me of the legends of changelings, where a baby has been swapped out for a fairy kind. I also once had my own strange experience with a fairy ring 30 years ago on a rainy Saturday morning. At the time, I had just begun studying English literature and religious studies at Stirling University. I wasn't particularly spiritual, but I was intrigued by many of the ideas taught in the course, so I decided to try out some of the techniques we were discussing in our lectures, and one of these was meditation in nature. The university campus is surrounded by thick woodland on the edge of the Ochil Hills. At the rear of the grounds is an ancient church with half-submerged gravestones that look like sinking ships in a green sea. I can still remember the sound of the rain falling on the broad leaves as I wandered through this and climbed up a small tree-covered hill in search of a peaceful place in which to meditate. Eventually, after pushing through fans of green bracken, I found myself in a small clearing ringed by rowan and birch trees. In the centre of this grassy arena was a vague circle of brown mushrooms. I sat down on a fallen tree, my feet touching the edge of the ring, and I closed my eyes. I inhaled a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill my lungs, and then slowly released it. All the time, I was counting slowly in my mind. I tried to imagine how with every inhalation I was pulling myself deeper into the natural world. It felt silly, but I persevered. One slow breath was followed by another. And then suddenly, without any real effort, something happened. Reality intensified. The sounds of nature grew louder as if some cosmic hand had turned up the volume. I could hear the droning of the rain thrumming heavily through the leaves. I could hear the cacophony of birdsong. I could smell the bitter-sweet tang of the rowan trees and the rich muskiness of the dark earth in the decaying tree upon which I sat. In many ways, despite my scepticism, I found myself feeling that I was connecting directly with nature, as if I was plugged into it in such an intense way I had never known before. I took another slow, deep breath, and it was then that I felt a gentle breeze blowing on my own face, and I opened my eyes to discover the face of an adult deer, an inch from my own, its huge dark eyes seemed to be looking into my soul. I stayed still, not moving for a moment, as the notoriously timid creature sniffed at my forehead and then at my waterproof jacket, before turning silently and leaping out of the fairy ring I didn't move as this notoriously timid creature sniffed gently at my forehead and then the hood of my waterproof jacket, before turning, and after peering at the trees for a moment, leaping out over the fairy ring, away from the clearing, leaving nothing and everything behind. In the context of Doon Hill, fairy rings are particularly significant. The area is so steeped in folklore related to the fairies that the appearance of any ring would have been taken as a visible sign that the fairies were present and active. Local people would have been cautious of these rings, and some may have gone out of their way to avoid stepping inside of them, fearful of what might happen if they did. The belief in fairy rings was widespread across Scotland, and their presence in a place like Doon Hill would have only added to the hill's reputation as a supernatural site. Of course, for anyone discovering that fairies could do you harm and seeing signs of their actual presence, they would probably want to keep in with them. One way of doing this was through gifts. The tradition of leaving gifts for fairies is rooted in the belief that these supernatural beings could influence human lives, either for good or ill. It was quite common for people to leave offerings of food, coins, or small trinkets at places where fairies were thought to dwell, such as Doon Hill, in the hopes of gaining their favour or protection. This practice was linked to the broader belief in the reciprocal relationships with the unseen world. People would often leave gifts for the fairies as a way of showing respect and inviting good fortune, and in exchange, the fairies were believed to bestow blessings such as good harvests, or protection from illnesses, or even the return of lost items. Conversely, failing to leave an offering, or disrespecting the fairies, was thought to bring misfortune, and many believed that the fairies could take revenge if they were not properly appeased. The practice of leaving gifts in fairy places continues to this very day in some parts of Scotland, and visitors to Doon Hill will often leave small items at the base of the trees or on rocks, hoping to honour the fairies that are believed to inhabit the place. These gifts, whether for luck or as part of a broader spiritual practice, continue to sustain the traditions associated with the hill, even today. And of course, this means that Doon Hill is a popular tourist destination, drawing visitors from all over the world who are interested in the hill's historical and supernatural associations. The area is frequently visited by those with an interest in history and also to see the natural beauty of the Trossachs. Hikers and nature enthusiasts often climb the hill to enjoy the stunning views of Loch Ard and the surrounding landscape, whilst others come simply in search of the mystical and legendary elements that have made the site famous. The hill's connection to Rob Roy MacGregor, Reverend Kirk, and the fairies continue to make it an attractive place. Guided tours of the area will often focus on the legends as well as the supernatural elements tied to it, providing visitors with a sense of the hill's mysterious past. Additionally, the area has been featured in books, documentaries, and articles about Scottish folklore, further cementing its place in the public imagination. While some may come to Doonhill seeking a tangible connection to the past, others simply visit it with a sense of wonder and curiosity about the supernatural. Whether one is a skeptic or a believer, Doonhill offers a unique opportunity to explore the intersection of history, folklore, and nature in one of Scotland's most enchanting and beautiful landscapes. So I do sincerely hope you get a chance to visit my beautiful homeland someday and make that scenic drive from Stirling to Aberfoyle. If you do so, be sure to visit Doonhill. Try to avoid wearing green or speaking about the Fae too loudly, and please leave some small gift near the minister's tree. It may just bring you good fortune. But if you are in the area, please don't linger there after dark, unless you are sitting by a crackling fire in some warm pub, because outside, in the darkness of the lochs, hills and forests, is a specific type of fairy, known as the Nuclavee, one of the unseelie court of fairies. Unlike the inhabitants of Doonhill, these creatures do not need provocation to attack humans. If you are wandering out in the dark, you might mistakenly believe that the thing clopping slowly towards you in the shadows is a person on horseback, and you'd be partly right, because as it drew closer, you would realise in horror that this abomination is a skinned rider sitting atop or fused to a skinned horse. The rider's red, raw, misshapen head is several times larger than a human's, and its massive, elongated mouth stretches wide open with needle teeth. And just like that other mother in the novel we mentioned at the start, the supernatural creature might just be seeking something good to eat. I'm Norman Brown. Thank you for sharing your time with me. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and rate the show on Spotify, Apple Music, or whichever platform you use. A new episode will drop every fortnight or even sooner, so there will be plenty more scary stories to enjoy. Tonight's episode, What Lies Beneath the Hill, included facts from scotlandstories.com, fairyist.com, and scotiana.com. Music was by Alfred Capestra of A Creative Journey, PG Richmond of Creative Audio, and Music and Media. Additional sounds were supplied by the Free Sound community, all of whom you will find over amongst the kind contributors on Pixabay. As for you, the listener, I appreciate your company, and stay scared.